All right, let's take you here now. The Minister of Higher Education and Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, is currently briefing the media on developments at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Let's take you live there now. He's currently on the podium.
Dr. Nkosinathi Sishi, who is also here with us, all the Deputy Directors General present from the Department of Higher Education and Training, the Chairperson of the Board of NSFAS, Mr. Ernest Khosa, and all the other board members of NSFAS who are here, the Acting CEO, Mr. Masile Ramorwesi, my special advisors, all officials present, members of the media. Good afternoon. I have called this media briefing today to provide the NSFAS beneficiaries, the parents or guardians, our institutions and the public at large with an update about the work underway at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, as we call it, to ensure that all the qualifying beneficiaries receive their allowances as per the funding guidelines. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the NSFAS Acting Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Ramorwesi, who is joining us for the first time today in our media briefing in the capacity as Acting Chief Executive Officer of NSFAS. I wish to remind all South Africans, as I start this briefing, about the mandate of NSFAS. NSFAS was established by our government in 1999 to provide financial assistance to deserving beneficiaries who qualify for tertiary education. Between 1991 and 1999, before its new name, it was known as TEFSA, Tertiary Education Fund for South Africa. As a scheme, NSFAS truly represents one of the most progressive efforts by our government to systematically break the legacies of intergenerational social inequality and poverty by ensuring access to post-school education and training. This is particularly important if we consider the structural and social legacies imposed over centuries of colonial and apartheid rule. There is no doubt that this government has made a decisive break in these reproductive legacies of the past. Since 1991 as TEFSA, NSFAS funding has grown from disbursing 21.4 million rands to now disbursing almost 50 billion rands to fund the children of the working class and the poor who seek to further their studies in public universities and our TVET colleges. This is a clear indication that government has prioritized a massive increase in student funding to radically broaden access to those sections of our communities who had no access to post-school education and training before. The other notable milestone for the scheme has been the integration of all public universities and TVET colleges to a new student-centered model wherein students apply directly to NSFAS for funding. This transition required a significant increase in NSFAS resources and involved major changes to the systems and the processes of NSFAS to handle large numbers of student applications. I must indicate that the resources that NSFAS so required is provided by this government. I must upfront indicate that NSFAS, insofar as it successfully services the needs to the vast majority of poor students, is not in a crisis, as many of our detractors would want the public to believe. We may be having glitches here and there, but the scheme is not in a crisis. Actually, we have turned the tide in student funding for the children of the poor and the working class, and NSFAS is the single biggest, largest student funding agency in Africa and a unique scheme in the world in that it completely funds students for their study, travel, accommodation, and personal care. In fact, it is for these reasons that our detractors want to project NSFAS as being in a crisis, because they want to discredit one of the most successful schemes of this ANC-led government. During the 2023 academic year, we are funding all qualifying students on the DHET bursary scheme who have been admitted for funded programs at public TVET colleges and universities. A total of 1,131,419 applications have been received through the scheme's online application, and 156,700 of these applications are from SASSA beneficiaries. In other words, those young people who are living on the child grant until they are 18. Which means, by the way, that what this government is doing is that for poor children who come from poor backgrounds, they get a child grant to be able to make some ends meet, to be fed from the day they are born until 18. And if they qualify to go to university or TVET college, they get NSFAS. Wrap around until they are able to finish their education. At the beginning of the year, we've also ensured that NSFAS provides for an upfront payment to institutions to cover for costs related to registration, tuition fees, and living allowances, to ensure that all NSFAS beneficiaries were registered in all our institutions without paying an upfront registration fee, without paying a cent. We have also ensured that we implement an inflation-linked increase of 5% on all allowances, and we also implemented a 10% increase on the living allowance. As of 13 January this year, NSFAS deployed its staff members to institutions across the country to assist with funding-related issues, data exchange processes with institutions to ensure seamless data integration and the registration of students onto new NSFAS direct payment systems. At that time, I also directed NSFAS to drastically improve its communication systems and urgently build capacity for prompt responses to all NSFAS inquiries, with a clear directive that not a single NSFAS query must be left unresponded to and timelessly. I also issued a warning to all those students who are improperly benefiting from NSFAS, together with their parents who are aware of this, and urged appropriate criminal and legal action against anyone found to be defrauding the system. I indicated that such students face the possibilities also to be declared illegible and actually removed from those who are being funded and criminally charged. But I'll come back to this matter before I end. For the past 2 years, NSFAS has made strides in its implementation of what we call a student-centered model. And two of the main initiatives aimed at this is the implementation of the NSFAS direct payment solution, better known as the NSFAS bank account, and the development of the NSFAS student accommodation portal. Let me explain very quickly this idea of a student-centered model and direct payment, because some of our detractors, they say, but we are using service providers to pay NSFAS students. Why do you call that direct? It is direct in the sense that we are shortening the movement of money from NSFAS to the students. And where we do not have capacity, including NSFAS, we have to get service providers who are actually going to assist us, especially because in the financial sector, you need people who are capable of being able to move money quickly. We are shortening. Unlike before, the money would move to a service provider and then move to a financial aid office before it actually goes to reach the students. So we want to shorten the amount of time and costs associated with direct payment. And our student-centered model is that at the heart of our system is the student first. This model is centered around an approach that places the needs of students at the heart of the scheme's operations, but also streamlining all processes that affect the disbursement of funds for tuition, transport, food, and accommodation. To date, a total of 509,220 claims received from university students, totaling 40 billion rand, have been paid. Already, this is above the allocation for the running or the monies we allocate to the universities. Got its own complications, that, by the way, because we have to manage that NSFAS does not run too much ahead to the amount of money we give the universities to run their affairs, because we may be finding students to go and register institutions that are becoming less and less capable to meet their needs. So the challenge of raising NSFAS means also the challenge on government is actually to ensure that we also fund universities and colleges at an increased level. We have already paid to 491,457 students an amount of 29.6 billion. There are 23,389 students with exceptions that we are currently funding. These exceptions occur when NSFAS cannot confirm the funding pathway or funding rules are not complied with as per submitted registration records. The biggest exceptions relate to institutions claiming incorrectly by including meals for their charges, yet they are catered for by the institution. This means sometimes there is double dipping, which must be attended to. NSFAS to date received 250,548 claims from TVET college students to the value of 6.8 billion rand. NSFAS paid 209,352 students at 4.8 billion. The difference is of 10,374 students which will be paid after the previous disbursement. There's another important achievement. Before 2010, there was no NSFAS for TVET colleges. From then, after the establishment of the Department of Higher Education and Training, TVET colleges also now receive NSFAS payment for their deserving students. I therefore once more would like to urge all our beneficiaries who have not been onboarded or registered or converted onto the new payment system to urgently do so in order to enable NSFAS to pay their allowances without any further delay. In order to illustrate progress in the onboarding of our students, I will now provide a breakdown by student percentages per our universities that have been onboarded. In other words, the students from these institutions who have joined the new payment system. There are universities that are onboarded that are at between 90 to 99% in terms of students who have come onto the system. That includes Cape Peninsula University of Technology, Central University of Technology, Durban University of Technology, Mangosuthu University of Technology, Nelson Mandela University, Tshwane University of Technology, University of the Free State, University of Johannesburg, University of KwaZulu-Natal, University of Limpopo, University of Mpumalanga, University of Pretoria, Sfako Makgato Health Sciences University, Sol Plaatje University in Kimberley, University of Stellenbosch, University of the Western Cape, University of Venda, University of Cape Town, Rhodes University, University of Zululand, Valley University of Technology, and Walter Sisulu University. Most of our universities, the students have onboarded. Universities that are between 80 to 90% is Northwest University and University of the Witwatersrand. The above statistics clearly demonstrates my previous point that NSFAS, insofar as it services the needs of the vast majority of eligible students across the system, is not in crisis. The University of South Africa stands at 67% of students who have registered for the new payment system, and the University of Fort Hare stands at 56%, which is the lowest. The NSFAS institutional support teams will extensively focus their attention in all those institutions whose percentages are low so that they improve on their onboarding processes. The team will continue holding bi-weekly meetings with the institution's finance officers and the direct payment partners so that institutions have a platform to raise the challenges and areas of clarity where both NSFAS and the partners are present. In relation to our TVET colleges, the process of onboarding continues as they have multiple academic terms. I'm currently awaiting a final report on the NSFAS investigations into the process of the appointment of the 4 direct payments program partners following public allegations on the process of their appointment. We are not hiding anything. NSFAS has undertaken an investigation on its own to make sure that these allegations that are being made are investigated. As a result of these allegations and the alleged claimed involvement of the NSFAS CEO, I have noted the decision by the board to place him, Mr. Nongoko, on leave of absence whilst investigations by an independent legal firm are ongoing on these allegations. And we are not saying he's guilty. All we've done, the board has said, just step aside whilst we investigate this matter. In relation to bank charges to student accounts, I've been briefed that NSFAS negotiated for a 12 Rand monthly bank charge, which excludes money transfer costs to other banks. I've directed that NSFAS relooks at the entire bank charges regime to find possible measures to further reduce these costs for our beneficiaries. I will await the board final determination in this regard. I have been assured by NSFAS board that reports that NSFAS disbursed incorrect amounts to beneficiaries are misleading and untrue. However, should it happen that such instances may have occurred, I urge the affected students to immediately report these to NSFAS. By the way, I had someone on the radio the other day, Chair, saying I've been trying to phone NSFAS to check if these 2 or 3 students are being funded or not. To me, that sounded very unusual, that a third party would call NSFAS and then say, when I was number 2 on the call, I was then cut. Because we encourage students who have applied, they've got means of accessing NSFAS directly. That a third person claims that he was checking for 2 or 3 made me to be very worried. That's why we urge the media, please. We know that talk radio is fashion now. But also please be careful that people do not just come onto the radio and make outrageous claims and then we get chased around everywhere we are that what about this, what about that, when some of the things are obviously not true. That's why we make our effort to brief the media and through the media also brief our country onto what is actually happening. I must also indicate that NSFAS will continue its collaborative work with other government entities such as the South African Social Security Agency, the South African Revenue Services, SARS, and the Department of Home Affairs to verify all NSFAS applications for funding to ensure the correct processing of student applications. According to the report from the NSFAS board, there were 45,927 records that shows the disqualification of students are due to processing gaps. And these processing gaps fall under 3 broad categories. The first one is hybrid applications, which I'll explain now. The second one is missing parental information or parental relationship. The third one is latency data from HEMIS, from our universities in the main. Let me spend a bit of time to explain these areas so that everyone understands it, because they seem to be a point of concern to students who were correctly or erroneously disqualified from benefiting from NSFAS. Hybrid applications means continuing students. These applications come from continuing students who applied. About 14,703 records were continuing students who applied erroneously because of migrating from the old to the new system. In other words, they apply again because they are migrating from the old to the new system, when in many instances it's not necessary. In some instances, it was students panicking because they did not see their funding status and then applied for funding. I can confirm that all these students are now funded. The balance of 31,224 students remains not funded, and this is due to the assessment of financial eligibility as NSFAS continues to pick up additional information from either Home Affairs or SARS or even SASA in some instances that these students are not eligible. Now, this is very important to emphasize this. That when people demonstrate and march against us, they mustn't march on behalf of students who are not supposed to be benefiting, because that's criminal. So those who are not benefiting have not been defunded because they were not eligible in the first place. So even the word defunding is wrong, because defunding is taking away funding from someone who deserves the funding. In this instance, it's ineligible students. And also, I do need to say, by the way, we are not unaware of the challenge of students who do not benefit from NSFAS, but also they come from families who are not earning much. That is why I'm going to Cabinet before the end of the year to submit a proposal for a scheme that will be launched to actually assist those students that are normally called missing middle students. But that does not mean that in the meantime, spaces or money meant for children from the working class and the poor must actually be stolen, because that is what it is, by those who are ineligible. Initially, some students, for instance, declared one parent or wrong parent, which was not picked up by the Department of Home Affairs as such. And then a decision is made, we will fund you. But however, based on the review of this trend, or through SARS, by the way, we pick up that your parent actually is not earning what we have claimed, because SARS records are accurate. So you do not qualify for NSFAS. And we urge South Africans, especially we urge the majority of the working class and poor families, to protect NSFAS for the sake of their own dependents and not allow NSFAS to be abused. This was exposed, as I have said. In some instances, this gets exposed by SARS through SARS verification. And then we discontinue funding because you do not deserve to be funded. That is why we urge students, please do not chance NSFAS. Another criterion, by the way, that sometimes lead to students' funding status changing is the academic eligibility review, which was incomplete due to the delays in data received from HEMIS, from particularly the universities. As a result of these disqualifications, NSFAS received a total of 178,426 appeals from students who say we have been removed from benefiting wrongly. We give them an opportunity to apply. Now, these outcomes of these 178,426 come to this. 63,000 of these, 63,331 of those appeals were approved, and 8,528 appeals were rejected. Out of these 178,426 appeals received, 30,712 were invalid appeals, meaning students either withdrew or their appeals were duplicated. Then there are 41,438 appeals that required the submission of external dependencies, such as additional documentation. About 20,908 are awaiting supporting document appeals, meaning the students submitted incorrect documents at the time of the appeal and were requested to provide further documents. In addition, 20,530 students, through results from my Department of Higher Education and Training and our institutions, indicate that the students did not progress. There are rules in eligibility that you have to continue to pass. Of course, there is a rule which allows you to fail once, but you can't be allowed to fail twice. And also you need to be progressing. The process, where students appeal and show that they've passed, that gets corrected. The process then dictates that NSFAS verify the information with the institution, and there's usually a time lag on the processing with the institutions. Currently, there are 11,284 appeals in evaluation, which are assigned to a caseworker to process each appeal. All these appeals will be attended to urgently. And NSFAS is committed to this, and I've raised this to NSFAS. Deal with the appeals through the shortest possible period. Now, I've also given directives, additional directives, to the board of NSFAS. I've had a meeting with the board, which gave me an initial report about all these challenges that NSFAS is facing. Based on the report, I've once more directed the board to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of implementing the solutions provided by the board itself. I've therefore directed the NSFAS board to immediately do the following. 1, implement the redesigned information system, which leverage modern technologies and capabilities in order to deliver the NSFAS mandate seamlessly. 2, review all their processes, operations, and their allowances disbursement model. 3, review their overall governance and management design to ensure the full execution of their mandate, and implement a new performance management and accountability framework in a bid to establish a high-performance culture within the organization. I've said to NSFAS, respond at the shortest possible time, and every single inquiry must be responded to. Also, I've directed NSFAS to improve its stakeholder media and communications relations. I was complaining the other day, Chair, to you, that I heard over the radio that NSFAS was expected, but there was no one representing NSFAS. Shame, my Ishmael tried his best, you know? So I've said to NSFAS, do not allow those things to happen. When we have committed that we are going to do interviews because it's important. In fact, there are very few organizations where communication is as important as in NSFAS. Also, I urged NSFAS, I said, implement a 24-hour call center and also initiate criminal and legal action against all those students and parents who have been defrauding NSFAS. This is what I have been doing as minister. To strengthen the NSFAS board, I have also taken a decision, I'm pleased to say, to replace 2 board members who had resigned, and I'm appointing 2 additional members of the board. Their names are Professor Lawrence van Staden, the former Vice Chancellor of Tshwane University of Technology and is currently administrator at Mangosuthu University of Technology, who has a wealth of experience in the higher education sector and has over the past 4 decades demonstrated his commitment to serving the poor and working class citizens of the country through his work. Professor van Staden studied at numerous universities and he examined over 30 master's and doctoral degree candidates for a number of universities locally and abroad, and published over 40 peer-reviewed articles and technical reports and presented over 30 papers nationally and abroad. But his experience as the Vice Chancellor is also key because he has been dealing with these problems on a daily basis, that and also dealing with NSFAS. The second board member that I am appointing, I'm pleased to announce, is Professor Ntomzozuko Janimhango, who has over 16 years of experience teaching, conducting research and supervising in the areas of constitutional law, public international law, and international criminal law. NSFAS has told me that in their board, they need a person with a strong legal background. In addition, Professor Janimhango served as a clerk at the South African Constitutional Court, was admitted as an advocate of the High Court of South Africa, and is rated as an established researcher by South Africa's National Research Foundation. Over and above these two, I'm also then replacing our former Chief Financial Officer in the Department of Higher Education and Training, Ms. Pritima Kukule, who did great job at NSFAS. I'm now appointing Mr. Lucian Cairns, who is the current acting Chief Financial Officer in our Department of Higher Education and Training. I will be finalizing all appointments in the board by adding a representative from National Treasury, who will be forwarded to me, hopefully shortly, by the Minister of Finance. On allowances paid by NSFAS, I think that it's important that before I conclude my statement, I would like to remind the public that NSFAS is paying the following allowances for all of our qualifying students for the 2023 academic year. And I want to say, by the way, I'm not aware of any such scheme, both in the developing and in the developed world. I'm not aware of any. Very few countries will be doing something similar to this. The one I know is Cuba, as a socialist country. But I'm not aware of any other country. For instance, university students' allowances, university managed and where there is catering, students receive a 5,460 learning materials allowance. After having paid, by the way, for all the tuition. University managed self-culture catering students receive a learning materials allowance to the value of 5,460, totaling to 16,500 per annum living allowance and accommodation, which is capped at 45,000 rand. And our living allowance has increased across the board to the value of 1,650 per month, which is 10% increment as compared to the 2022 figure. I don't want to be seen to be making an unfair comparison. But many of South African workers are earning less than this per month. I'm talking about workers who are actually working as domestic workers, as security, as gardeners and all that. Students who are living with relatives, not in private accommodation, receive a learning materials allowance of 5,460 and accumulating to 16,500 per annum living allowance. Private off-campus accredited accommodation students are receiving a learning materials allowance of 5,460, accumulating to 16,500 per annum living allowance, and with their accommodation allowance capped at 45,000 rand. And TVET student allowances. TVET college-owned catered residents receive an accommodation allowance to the value of 54,000 rand, 45 rand. TVET college managed own and leased self-catered accommodation for the first time receive a living allowance of 6,000 rand. Personal care allowance of 3,445 per annum and a maximum 45,000 plus living allowance paid to TVET colleges. TVET students in private accommodation receive a 6,000 rand living allowance, 3,045 personal care allowance, and 45,000 rand per annum accommodation allowance. TVET students residing less than 10 kilometers from the college receive a 6,000 rand living allowance, 3,045 personal care allowance, and 7,718 travel allowance. All these allowances are in line with the 2023 NSFAS eligibility criteria and conditions for financial aid already published and shared with institutions. We urge parents and guardians in particular to familiarize themselves with this. In some instances, I have met many parents. I want to say this. At one stage, I met a Makoko. I said, Nzimande, why are you quiet and not making a noise? Because they can see the contribution that government is making to actually make our youth to acquire education. In conclusion, it remains our commitment as an ANC government to transform our post-school education system and ensuring that no student is excluded from to access government funding that is directed at the students who come from the families of the working class and the poor. It is not an option for our post-school system and training system to remain the preserve of only those who can afford to pay. What we have done here is evidence of the extent to which we have reversed the denial of education by the criminal apartheid regime in our country. This is amongst the reasons that we are now finalizing the work, as I have said, on our comprehensive student funding model, which will be announced after approval by Cabinet. And with this, I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that comprehensive statement.